Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into a story that's, well, nuts. Literally. Imagine scrolling through your favorite art feed, past the epic murals and the grand sculptures, and then you see it. A masterpiece so tiny, so impossibly detailed, it could rest on your fingertip, nestled within the curve of a common nutshell. We're venturing back to the Renaissance, a time of artistic giants, but we're seeking out a whisper, a quiet marvel of precision, a woman whose canvases were the discarded shells of everyday snacks. Think about trying to paint the Mona Lisa, but on a pistachio shell with a single squirrel whisker for a brush. Yeah, you probably wouldn't have survived this. Your patience or your eyesight likely giving out before you even mixed your first color. It's a world of painstaking, microscopic artistry. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps more than you know, and let's be honest, it strokes the old ego just a tiny bit. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we collectively try to ignore our impending responsibilities. Now turn down the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a cool, stone floor, the scent of linseed oil, damp earth, and something vaguely like old cheese tickling your nose. Outside, the familiar clamor of a bustling Italian city. Florence, perhaps, or maybe Siena, hums like a restless beehive. It's the late 15th century, a period brimming with rebirth, with patrons flashing their florins and artists scrambling for commissions like pigeons for breadcrumbs. You, however, are not in one of the grand, echoing studios of the masters whose names now fill art history textbooks. Instead, you're in a much smaller, quieter space. A little room, perhaps tucked away in a less fashionable part of the city, the light carefully managed by a single, north-facing window, its shutters angled just so. This is the world of Signorina Ilara Vizzini. Not a name you'd likely hear shouted in the grand piazzas, but one whispered with a certain awe in more select, curious circles. You see her now, bent over a sturdy wooden table, her dark hair braided and coiled tightly, a few stray wisps escaping to frame a face etched with intense concentration. She's not young, perhaps in her late 30s, a time when many women of her era were expected to be fully immersed in domestic life, their creative outlets confined to perhaps a bit of embroidery or managing a household. Ilara, though, is different. In her hand, she holds not a hefty brush, but something impossibly delicate, a tool you can barely make out, perhaps a bird's feather quill sharpened to an almost invisible point, or a single hair plucked from a sable's tail and painstakingly affixed to a tiny wooden dowel. And her canvas? Well, resting on a small velvet cushion is a walnut shell, halved and scraped clean. It seems an absurdly humble beginning for what will become a miniature marvel. You lean closer, careful not to cast a shadow. Her breath is slow and even, a tiny cloud in the cool air of the room. The silence is punctuated only by the distant cry of a street vendor and the almost imperceptible scratch, scratch, scratch of her work. It's a common historical fact that Renaissance artists often relied heavily on the patronage system, with wealthy families, guilds, or the church commissioning most major artworks. This system dictated not only who got to create art, but also, frequently, the subject matter, size, and even the materials used. For a woman like Alara, navigating this world would have been a tightrope walk over a chasm of societal expectations. While noble women might receive some education in the arts, becoming a professional artist, especially one with such an unconventional specialty, was a rarity. You can almost picture her presenting her delicate work to a skeptical patron, a portly merchant perhaps, who's more used to frescoes that cover entire walls. He probably squinted and asked if it was some kind of newfangled children's toy. Joke's on him. That tiny shell is now worth more than his entire spice shipment. The air in the room grows a little colder. You notice a small clay brazier in the corner, unlit. Fuel was expensive, and Ilara, it seems, prefers the sharp clarity of the cool air to keep her focused, or perhaps the warmth makes her delicate hands tremble. Historians still debate whether female artists of this period, who did achieve some renown, like Sophonisba Anguissola or Lavinia Fontana, operated with the same level of independence as their male counterparts, or if they were more often working under the guidance or within the established workshops of male relatives. For Ilara, working on such a small, almost secretive scale, it's even harder to tell. Was this her deliberate choice, a way to carve out a unique niche, or a necessity born from limited opportunities in the more mainstream, large-scale art world? You wonder if she ever longed to slap paint on a giant canvas, to make mistakes that were bigger than a breadcrumb. She pauses, her shoulders slumping just a fraction. She picks up another nutshell, this one a hazelnut, and rolls it between her fingers, her gaze distant. What's truly bizarre is the rumor that some of her tiniest, most detailed pieces weren't just landscapes or portraits, but incredibly intricate anatomical studies, supposedly copied from smuggled drawings originating from the then controversial dissections being performed at universities like Padua. Imagine the entire human circulatory system rendered in microscopic detail on the inside of a pistachio shell. It's a wonderfully macabre thought, a tiny rebellion hidden within an object of beauty. If true, it speaks of a fierce curiosity, a desire to understand the world far beyond the prescribed boundaries for a woman of her time. It's like she was building tiny little horcruxes of knowledge. One wonders what the penalty for owning an anatomically correct hazelnut might have been back then. Probably a stern lecture and confiscation of your nuts. You watch as Ilara sets aside the hazelnut and returns to the walnut shell, her focus snapping back with an almost audible click. Her fingers, surprisingly strong despite their delicate task, are stained with pigments, a faint ochre on her thumb, a smudge of lapis lazuli near her cuticle. These materials themselves tell a story. Pigments in the Renaissance weren't squeezed from convenient tubes. They were ground by hand from minerals, insects, and plants. Lapis lazuli, for instance, a vibrant blue, came from a semi-precious stone mined primarily in Afghanistan, making it incredibly expensive, often worth more than gold by weight. For Ilara to be using it, even in the microscopic quantities her art demanded, suggests either a wealthy patron with a taste for the exquisite, or that she was incredibly resourceful, perhaps trading her unique skills for tiny amounts of these precious materials. Maybe she knew a guy who knew a guy who found a little pile of blue dust near a monastery. "Don't ask, just paint," he probably said. You notice the array of tiny pots on her table, each containing a different color. Some are familiar: earthy reds, deep browns, vibrant greens. Others are more unusual. There's a glistening, almost iridescent white made from ground pearls, a closely guarded secret of some miniaturists. The mainstream historical fact here is that artists' guilds during the Renaissance were powerful. They controlled apprenticeships, material quality, and even who could sell art in a particular city. For an artist working outside these established structures, or in an unrecognized medium like nutshell painting, acquiring materials and legitimacy would have been a constant hustle. Ilara likely couldn't just pop down to the local ye old art supply store. Her network, her ingenuity, these were as crucial as her artistic skill. She dips her impossibly fine brush into a dark pigment, and then, with a steadiness that seems almost inhuman, she applies a line thinner than a spider's silk to the interior of the walnut shell. You try to imagine the scene she's creating. Is it a pastoral landscape, a miniature adoration of the Magi's, or perhaps a portrait of a wealthy merchant's favorite cat, immortalized in a space smaller than its own eye? The scale is baffling. It's art that demands you draw near, that forces intimacy. Unlike a grand fresco that overwhelms you from across a piazza, Ilara's work pulls you into its tiny universe. It's the ultimate you had to be there kind of art, except there is about 2 inches from your nose. Suddenly, a sharp rap on the door makes you jump, though Ilara merely stiffens for a moment before her expression smooths into careful neutrality. She calls out a soft "Avanti," and the door creaks open. A man enters, well dressed, but not ostentatiously so, perhaps a secretary to a nobleman or a scholar. He carries a small, leather-bound book and an air of quiet importance. He doesn't look directly at Ilara's work at first, his eyes scanning the modest room with a practiced, appraising gaze. You sense this is a familiar dance, the cautious ballet of artist and potential client, or perhaps someone checking on a commission. He speaks in low, measured tones, and Ilara responds with equal quietness, her voice surprisingly deep. You can't quite catch the words, but the cadence is polite, professional. There's a tension here, though. The man gestures towards the walnut shell, and Ilara picks it up, presenting it with a steady hand. He produces a small lens from his pouch, a magnifying glass, and peers intently. You hold your breath. What if he sneezes? The entire Medici family tree, painstakingly rendered on a pecan, could be lost to a sudden nasal explosion. It's a high-stakes game, this miniature world. The man murmurs something, a sound of appreciation, perhaps, or critical assessment. Ilara nods, her face unreadable. This brings up an interesting scholarly debate: the true authorship and influence within an artist's studio, especially for unconventional artists. Historians still argue about how much creative control artists like Ilara truly had. Were they simply skilled technicians executing a patron's very specific vision, or were they recognized as creative intellects in their own right, able to propose and execute their own ideas? The power dynamic is palpable even in this quiet room. If the patron wanted a tiny battle scene with exactly 37 knights and one very confused-looking dragon on a cashew, did Ilara have any say, or did she just nod and ask if the dragon preferred to be rendered in profile or full frontal ferocity? Now for a bizarre detail. It was rumored that some miniaturists, to achieve an unparalleled steadiness of hand, would practice controlled breathing exercises, sometimes learning from monks or mystics. There were even whispers of artists who would only work during the silent pause between their own heartbeats, believing this infinitesimal moment of stillness was key to placing the perfect microscopic stroke. You watch Ilara's calm demeanor, the rhythmic, almost meditative slowness of her movements when she works, and you wonder if there's truth to these tales. Is she in some kind of Zen state, her pulse a metronome for her art? It adds another layer of dedication, almost a spiritual practice to her craft. It's like extreme sports, but for people who find competitive staring too rowdy. The man finally nods, a satisfied curl to his lip. He says something that makes Ilara offer a rare, fleeting smile. He places a small, clinking pouch on the table, the satisfying sound of payment, or perhaps a new commission. He gives a curt bow and departs, leaving Ilara alone once more with her tiny worlds. She doesn't immediately pounce on the coins. Instead, she picks up a different shell, this one a pistachio, already bearing the faint outline of what looks like a seascape, complete with impossibly tiny waves. She gazes at it for a long moment, then selects a brush with a single, almost invisible bristle. The sheer, unadulterated patience required is astounding. You'd have eaten the pistachio, shell and all, by now out of sheer frustration. It makes you wonder about the lost art of simply being still, of finding immensity in the infinitesimal. In our world of constant updates and instant gratification, Ilara's dedication to the microscopic feels like a quiet rebellion, a patient insistence on the value of the small, the overlooked, the intensely focused. You feel a wave of calm just watching her, the city's hum fading a little further into the background as her tiny universe expands to fill your awareness. The pouch of coins sits on the table, a small, tangible reward for hours of eye-straining, mind-focusing work. You watch as Ilara finally reaches for it, not with eagerness, but with a quiet practicality. She unties the leather thong and tips the contents into her palm, a modest collection of silver and copper pieces, enough to buy pigments, new shells perhaps, food for the week, and maybe a little extra to tuck away. It's not the fortune that a master painter might command for an altarpiece, but it's a living, earned through a skill so unique it borders on the magical. You imagine her haggling for the finest, unblemished walnuts at the market, inspecting each one like a jeweler examining a rough diamond, much to the confusion of the nut vendor. "Just for eating, signorina?" he'd ask, and she'd just give a mysterious smile. Something like that. Her gaze drifts towards a small, wooden chest tucked under her work table. This, you sense, is where she keeps her most prized possessions, her finest brushes, rare pigments inherited or painstakingly acquired, and perhaps a collection of particularly perfect, unpainted nutshells. It's a mainstream historical fact that artists during the Renaissance often kept meticulous records or books of secrets detailing their techniques, pigment recipes, and workshop practices. These were sometimes passed down to apprentices or family members. You wonder if Ilara keeps such a book, her handwriting as tiny and precise as the strokes of her brush, filled with instructions on how to prepare a hazelnut for painting, or the best way to achieve the luminescence of dawn on a canvas the size of your thumbnail. Such a document, if it existed, would be an invaluable insight into her lost art. She rises and stretches, her joints creaking softly, a reminder of the long hours spent hunched in concentration. You follow her as she walks to the window, pushing the wooden shutters open a little wider. The afternoon light, now softened and golden, streams into the room, illuminating floating dust motes that dance like tiny, lazy fairies. She looks out over the jumble of terracotta rooftops, the sounds of the city a little more subdued now. Perhaps she's looking for inspiration, or maybe just resting her eyes, focusing on distant shapes to counteract the intense close work. It's said that some miniaturists developed exceptional long distance vision as a counterpoint to their microscopic focus, like a superpower born from an occupational hazard. People might whisper, she can spot a fly on a nobleman's wig from 100 paces. The demand for miniatures, while not as grand as frescoes or large panel paintings, was significant during the Renaissance and beyond. They were portable, intimate, and could be incredibly personal. Lovers exchanged miniature portraits. Scholars kept tiny landscapes as objects of contemplation. Wealthy patrons commissioned them as unique collectibles, sometimes set into jewelry or small ornate boxes. Elara's nutshells would have been the ultimate conversation starter at any sophisticated gathering. "Oh, this old thing?" a nobleman might say, casually revealing a walnut containing the entire siege of Troy. "Just a little something I picked up." The sheer novelty, combined with the evident skill, would have been captivating. A bizarre detail you recall hearing about the miniature art world is the existence of nutshell libraries. Not libraries about nutshells, but tiny functioning books with pages no bigger than a fingernail, bound and kept inside a hollowed out nutshell. These weren't common, more like exquisite oddities, but they speak to the fascination with the miniature, the desire to compress vast amounts of information or artistry into the smallest possible space. You can almost see Elara collaborating with a scribe, one painstakingly painting illustrations, while the inscribes inscribes near microscopic text. It would be the Renaissance equivalent of trying to read the terms and conditions on a website, only far more beautiful and probably less infuriating. Elara turns from the window, her brief respite over. She picks up a different kind of tool now, not a brush, but a fine pointed stylus. She selects a new canvas, this time a smooth, pale almond shell. She begins to etch, not paint, a series of incredibly fine lines onto its surface. This technique, called scrimshaw when done on ivory or bone, is even more demanding in some ways than painting, as mistakes are almost impossible to correct. This leads to an ongoing scholarly debate. Were these miniaturists primarily considered painters, or were they part of a broader tradition of skilled craftspeople, like goldsmiths or engravers, whose work blurred the lines between art and artisanal craft? The distinction matters because it would have affected their status, their training, and how their work was valued. Was Elara an artista in the same vein as Leonardo, or a highly specialized artigiana? Given the snobbery that often pervaded the art world, it's likely a distinction that affected her opportunities and recognition. You suspect Elara herself cared little for the labels, focusing instead on the challenge and beauty of her chosen medium. She seems like the kind of person who'd just raise an eyebrow at such debates and get back to carving a perfect, tiny elephant onto a pistachio shell, because why not? You notice her brow furrow slightly as she works on the almond shell. There's a flaw in the shell, a tiny crack, almost invisible to your eye, but to her it's a canyon. She sighs a small, frustrated sound and sets the almond shell aside. Not every canvas is perfect, not every attempt a success. This is the unseen part of her work, the discarded shells, the hours spent on pieces that would never be completed, the quiet frustrations of working at such a demanding scale. It's a reminder that even for the most skilled artists, the process is one of trial and error. It's not all just effortless genius. There's a lot of, well, that one's going in the bin moments, even if the bin is just a small pile of cracked nuts. The sun begins to dip lower, and the light in her small room shifts again, turning warmer, more orange. Alara lights a single tallow candle, its flame casting dancing shadows that make her tiny workspace seem even more intimate, more secret. The day is winding down, but for Alara, there are still microscopic worlds waiting to be born. The candlelight flickers, casting Alara's focused face in a warm glow, her shadow dancing on the wall behind her, like a larger, more restless version of herself. You notice the way she occasionally rubs her eyes, a slow, deliberate movement. The strain of such intricate work, day after day, year after year, must be immense. It's a well-documented historical fact that many artisans who engaged in fine, detailed work, scribes, illuminators, jewelers, and miniaturists like Alara, often suffered from vision problems and repetitive strain injuries. Glasses, or spectacles, as they were then known, were available, but they were expensive and not always perfectly suited to the individual's needs. You wonder if Alara possessed a pair, perhaps tucked away for when the burning in her eyes became too much, or if she relied on sheer willpower and the careful rationing of her eyesight, treating it as another precious, finite resource. It's like she's in a staring contest with her art, and if she blinks too much, the art wins by becoming a blurry mess. She seems to be preparing her own pigments now, grinding something in a small stone mortar and pestle. The rhythmic scrape and crunch is a soft, almost meditative sound in the quiet room. She adds a drop of binder, perhaps egg yolk for tempera or gum arabic, her movements precise and economical. This self-sufficiency was common. While established workshops might have apprentices to do the grunt work of pigment preparation, a solitary artist like Alara would likely handle every stage of the process herself. It gave her complete control over her materials, but it also added to her already considerable workload. You can imagine her carefully guarding her recipes, the exact proportions of pigment to binder, the secrets of achieving a particular hue that wouldn't crack or fade on the curved surface of a nutshell. Her kitchen probably looked less like a place for cooking food and more like a very small, very specific chemistry lab. What's for dinner, Alara? Tonight we have a lovely shade of vermilion with a hint of walnut dust. Where does one even get a steady supply of perfect nutshells for such an unusual art form? It's not like there was a Nutshells R Us emporium. This brings to mind a rather bizarre detail. Some historical accounts mention that artists specializing in unusual materials would form equally unusual alliances. Perhaps Ilara had an arrangement with a particular grocer or even the kitchen staff of a wealthy household to save the best formed shells for her. You can picture a scullery maid carefully setting aside pristine walnut halves, almond shells without a chip, or the rare, unblemished pistachio shell, knowing they were destined not for the fire, but for something far stranger and more wonderful. Maybe she paid them a small finder's fee, a few extra coins for their trouble, fostering a small, secret network of nutshell suppliers. It's the Renaissance version of a recycling program, only with much more artistic end results. Don't throw that away. It could be a masterpiece. The sourcing of her canvases leads to another scholarly debate: the perceived value and status of art based on its materials. Renaissance art theory, heavily influenced by classical ideals, often prized works made from durable and costly materials like marble, bronze, or expensive pigments on panel and fresco. Art made from humble, everyday, or ephemeral materials, like, say, nutshells, might have struggled for the same level of critical acclaim or serious consideration, regardless of the skill involved. Historians still argue whether patrons and critics of the time could fully separate the monetary value of the materials from the artistic value of the creation itself. Did some dismiss Ilara's work as mere curiosities or trifles precisely because a walnut shell was, after all, just a walnut shell? Or did the sheer impossibility of her skill elevate the humble material to something transcendent? You suspect it was a mixed bag, with some marveling at the transformation, and others wondering why such talent wasn't applied to something more substantial, like a really, really big nutshell, perhaps. A soft knock comes at the door, different from the earlier, more officious rap. Ilara calls out, her voice a little softer this time, and a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, peeks in. She carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth. An apprentice? A niece? Or perhaps just a neighbor's child running an errand. The girl approaches Ilara shyly, her eyes wide as she glances at the tiny works on the table. Ilara's expression softens noticeably. She takes the bundle, it looks like it might contain bread and cheese, and offers the girl a genuine, warm smile. They exchange a few quiet words. You see a different side of Ilara now, a glimpse of the woman beneath the intensely focused artist. Perhaps this child is one of the few who sees Ilara regularly, who isn't just a client or a supplier. The girl points a small finger towards a finished piece, a ladybug painted on a lentil, so lifelike it seems it might crawl away. Ilara picks it up carefully and lets the child examine it. For a moment, the vast, bustling world of Renaissance art, with its popes and princes, its grand ambitions and public spectacles, shrinks to the space between this woman and this child, sharing a moment of wonder over something incredibly small and beautiful. It's a reminder that art isn't just for the wealthy or the powerful. It's for anyone who can appreciate skill, beauty, and a touch of magic. The girl giggles, a bright, clear sound in the dusky room, before curtsying quickly and darting out, leaving Ilara with her simple meal and her extraordinary creations. Ilara unwraps the bread and cheese, her movements unhurried. The intensity of her concentration seems to have eased, replaced by a quiet pensiveness. Even a miniaturist needs to eat, to step away from the microscope, metaphorically speaking, and remember the larger world her tiny art reflects. The faint scent of baking bread now mingles with the oil and pigments, making the small room feel, for a moment, less like a workshop and more like a home. After her simple meal, Ilara doesn't immediately return to the intense focus of painting. Instead, she carefully clears a small space on her workbench and unrolls a piece of vellum, weighting its corners with smooth stones. She picks up a stick of charcoal and begins to sketch, Not the tiny, intricate details you've come to expect, but larger, looser forms. The curve of a bird's wing, the unfurling of a fern, the way light falls on a folded cloth. It's a reminder that even for a specialist in the miniature, a foundational understanding of form, light, and composition, honed through traditional drawing practice, is essential. This is a core tenet of Renaissance art education. Drawing, or disegno, was considered the fundamental basis of all arts, the intellectual process of giving form to an idea before committing it to a more permanent medium. Even if your final canvas is a pecan, you still need to know how to draw a horse that doesn't look like a bewildered sausage. You watch her sketch, and you notice how her hand, so steady and precise when holding the tiny brush, moves with a surprising freedom and boldness with the charcoal. It's as if a different part of her artistic spirit is allowed to breathe here. Perhaps these sketches are studies for future nutshell masterpieces, a way to work out larger compositions before shrinking them down to an almost impossible scale. Or maybe it's simply a release, a way to stretch her artistic muscles in a different direction. It's like a world-class sprinter occasionally enjoying a leisurely stroll, just to remember what walking feels like. As twilight deepens outside, casting long, eerie shadows across the room, there's a more insistent knock at the door. This one has an air of impatience. Elara carefully sets down her charcoal, a slight frown creasing her brow. She opens the door to reveal a man cloaked and hooded despite the mild evening. He carries a small, intricately carved wooden box. He doesn't enter but speaks in a low, urgent whisper, glancing nervously up and down the narrow alleyway. He gestures with the box. Elara listens intently, her expression becoming more serious. You can't hear the words, but the tone is one of secrecy and perhaps a little danger. This isn't your average art commission for a portrait of someone's pet pug on a peanut. The man finally presses the box into her hands, and with another furtive look around, melts back into the deepening shadows as silently as he arrived. Elara closes the door, her movements deliberate, and brings the box to her table. For a moment, she just looks at it. What could require such secrecy? This is where the world of high art could sometimes intersect with less savory elements. A mainstream historical fact is that art in the Renaissance wasn't just about piety and beauty. It was also deeply enmeshed with power, politics, and intrigue. Portraits could be diplomatic tools, allegories could carry hidden political messages, and sometimes artists were called upon for tasks that required utmost discretion. She finally opens the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, is not a gem or a precious relic, but a single dried pea, and a tiny rolled-up scroll of parchment tied with a silken thread. Elara carefully unrolls the scroll. The script is elegant but minuscule. Her eyes scan it quickly, and her frown deepens. You can only imagine the request. Perhaps a secret message to be inscribed on the pea, so tiny it could only be read with a powerful lens, or a symbolic image that needs to be painted on its surface, something that would be unrecognizable to the casual observer but hold deep meaning for the intended recipient. The sheer absurdity of painting on a pea is almost comical, yet the atmosphere in the room is anything but. It feels like a spy thriller if James Bond's gadgets were made by a very patient, slightly obsessive jeweler. Q, this better be an exploding pea, or I'm going to be very disappointed. This brings us to a bizarre, almost legendary detail concerning miniature art, the creation of flea chains. These were, supposedly, microscopic chains with fully articulated links crafted by goldsmiths or other masters of an infinitesimal scale, so tiny they could be used to leash a flea. While some accounts are likely apocryphal, the legend itself speaks volumes about the fascination with mastering the impossibly small. Painting a message on a pea seems almost mundane by comparison, but technically just as challenging. You wonder if Alara sees this not just as a commission, but as a test of her ultimate skill. Can she push the boundaries of her art even further, into the realm of the truly microscopic? The scholarly debate here might revolve around the ethics and dangers faced by artists who undertook such clandestine commissions. If Ilara is indeed creating an object intended for secret communication, possibly related to political factions or forbidden love affairs, what are the risks? Historians still debate the extent to which artists were aware of, or complicit in, the potentially dangerous uses of their creations. Was she merely a skilled hand, paid for a difficult task, or did such commissions draw her into the shadowy undercurrents of Renaissance society? The line between artisan and unwilling or willing accomplice could be perilously thin. It's one thing to paint a tiny saint for a prayer nut. It's another to paint a tiny down with the Duke on a lentil destined for his soup. Ilara sighs, a sound that seems to carry the weight of the city's secrets. She carefully places the pea and the scroll back into the box and closes the lid. She doesn't begin work on it immediately. Instead, she goes to her small chest and takes out a finished piece, one you haven't seen before. It's a cherry pit, and on its polished surface, she has painted a stunningly detailed rendition of a starry night sky, each constellation precisely placed, each star a microscopic pinprick of light. She holds it up to the candlelight, turning it slowly. It's as if she's drawing strength or solace from this tiny universe of her own making before embarking on the strange task presented by the pea. Perhaps it's her way of reminding herself of the beauty and order she can create, a counterpoint to the murky intrigue of the new commission. You feel a sense of quiet admiration for her. In a world of grand gestures and loud pronouncements, she finds her power in the quiet, painstaking creation of the infinitesimal. The night deepens, the sounds of Florence outside become more muted, and in her small room, lit by a single candle, Ilara Vizzini contemplates the universe held within a cherry stone, and the secrets held within a pea. The cherry pit universe seems to offer its silent counsel. After a few more moments of contemplation, Ilara carefully places it back in its secure spot. Her expression is now set with a quiet resolve. The mysterious commission, with its clandestine delivery and unusual canvas, the pea, is a challenge she apparently intends to meet. You see her retrieve the carved wooden box, her movements economical and precise. She takes out the pea and the tiny scroll once more. This time, she doesn't hesitate. She flattens the parchment again, places it beside her smallest pigment pots, and selects what must be her finest, most impossibly thin brush, one that looks like it might have been made from the antenna of a particularly unlucky moth. She prepares a minuscule amount of dark pigment, her breath held steady. The mainstream historical fact that comes to mind is the sheer variety of specialized tools that Renaissance artists, particularly those in detailed crafts, developed or adapted. From unique brush fibers to specially ground points for engraving, innovation was key. Ilara's toolkit is likely a testament to years of such personal innovation, things you couldn't just buy but had to invent out of necessity. Before she touches brush to pea, however, she does something unexpected. She reaches for a small, smooth piece of horn, almost translucent, and holds it up to the candlelight. She squints through it, angling it this way and that. Is it a rudimentary magnifying lens? This touches upon a rather obscure detail. While sophisticated lenses were being developed, simpler magnifiers, sometimes made from polished beryl or even water-filled glass spheres, were known. For an artist like Ilara, any aid to vision for such incredibly fine work would be a closely guarded secret or a precious tool. It's the Renaissance equivalent of an artist having a secret, high-resolution monitor nobody else knows about. With the aid of her simple magnifier, or perhaps just her own extraordinary eyesight and focus, she finally dips the tip of her brush, a speck of pigment barely visible, and leans over the pea. The scholarly debate here might briefly touch upon the anonymity of such secret works. If this pea carries a vital, perhaps treasonous message, would Ilara get any credit or even desire it? Or was her satisfaction purely in the technical mastery, the fee, and the knowledge that her unique skill served a hidden purpose? Historians often struggle to attribute unsigned works, especially those intended to be discreet. Ilara's name might never be officially linked to this tiny object, yet her artistry is indelible upon it. The city outside is now mostly asleep. The earlier hum faded to a distant murmur. The only sounds in the room are Ilara's soft breaths and the almost imperceptible whisper of the brush as she begins her work on the pea. The flame of the single candle throws just enough light for her task, creating a tiny, focused island of activity in the vast darkness. You sense the immense concentration. The world shrunk down to this single, humble legume, and the message or image it is destined to bear. It's a quiet cliffhanger, a commitment made in the stillness of the night. What will she paint or write, and what will the consequences be? That, you feel, is a story for another stretch of the night. The night deepens around you, the air in Ilara's small room growing cooler, the candle flame dancing with a hypnotic rhythm. Hours seem to pass, marked only by the slow, steady progress Ilara makes on the surface of the tiny pea. You lean in, metaphorically, of course, trying to discern what she's creating. Is it a coded symbol, a microscopic portrait, or perhaps, as instructed by that tiny scroll, a few carefully chosen words, each letter a masterpiece of calligraphic precision? The sheer control is breathtaking. One tremor, one misplaced sigh, and the entire endeavor could be ruined. It's like watching someone try to defuse a bomb, only the bomb is a vegetable, and the tools are finer than a mosquito's eyelash. You observe her technique. She isn't just painting, she's almost sculpting the pigment onto the pea's surface, building up layers so infinitesimally thin they're almost transparent at first, gradually achieving the desired opacity and form. A mainstream historical fact about Renaissance painting, especially in traditions like manuscript illumination, from which miniature art partly evolved, is the careful layering of colors. Artists didn't just slap on a single coat, they built up depth and luminosity through multiple translucent washes or delicate strokes. Ilara is applying this grand tradition to the humblest of canvases, a testament to the underlying principles that connected all forms of Renaissance art, regardless of scale. She's essentially making a tiny edible fresco if you were brave enough to eat it, which you probably shouldn't. Finally, after what feels like an eternity compressed into a few hours, she leans back, her shoulders slumping with a mixture of exhaustion and perhaps satisfaction. The pea sits on its velvet cushion, now transformed. You still can't quite make out the details from your ethereal vantage point, but it clearly bears the mark of her incredible skill. She lets it dry, the candle flame her only companion in the silent room. The city outside is in its deepest slumber. This is the unseen life of an artist like Ilara, the solitary nights, the intense focus when the rest of the world is still, the quiet anxieties and triumphs that accompany each completed piece. Now for a truly bizarre detail associated with such secretive commissions. Sometimes the payment wasn't in coin, but in equally discreet or unusual forms. Perhaps information, a rare pigment not obtainable through normal channels, or even a promise of future protection or patronage from an influential unnamed source. You wonder what Ilara will receive for this peculiar task, beyond the initial offering in the carved box. Will it be something that aids her art, or something that draws her further into this shadowy world of intrigue? It's like those video game side quests where the reward is exposure, or a unique item that turns out to be mildly useful, but mostly just weird. As dawn approaches, painting the sky outside her window in faint strokes of gray and lavender, Ilara carefully places the now dry pea back into its ornate wooden box. She doesn't admire her work for long. This isn't for her to keep. Her movements are efficient, betraying a hint of weariness. She tidies her workspace, cleaning her impossibly fine brushes with a practiced hand, capping her pigment pots. The room returns to its usual state of ordered calm, the only evidence of the night's unusual labor, the lingering scent of the candle, and the faint tension in Ilara's posture. The scholarly debate that arises here concerns the legacy and recognition of artists who primarily produced such ephemeral or easily lost works. While grand altarpieces and marble statues have endured for centuries, how many microscopic masterpieces on nutshells, fruit stones, or even peas have simply vanished, disintegrated, or been carelessly discarded, their creators' names lost to time? Historians grapple with this lost canon of art, trying to piece together the contributions of artists whose mediums were, by their very nature, fragile or unconventional. Ilara's legacy might not be found in grand museums, but in the whispers of her skill, the few surviving examples that defy belief, and the very idea that such art was even possible. Perhaps somewhere, a noble family still has a tiny painted bean in their collection, and they just think their ancestor was really into very, very small decorations. Just as the first rays of the sun tentatively touch the rooftops, the same discreet knock from the previous evening sounds at her door. Ilara, showing no surprise, opens it. The cloaked figure is there, as expected. No words are exchanged. Ilara simply hands over the carved wooden box. The figure takes it, perhaps offering a slight nod. It's hard to tell in the dim hallway. Then, as quickly and silently as before, he is gone. Ilara watches him disappear down the alley for a moment, her expression unreadable. Relief, lingering curiosity, or just the quiet weariness of a job completed. She closes the door, the click of the latch echoing softly in the morning stillness. Another secret delivered, another tiny marvel sent out into the world, its purpose and destination unknown to you, and perhaps even largely to her. She turns back to her room, the new day offering a clean slate, or perhaps just more nutshells waiting for their transformation. With the secretive commission delivered and vanished into the nascent light of Florence, a subtle shift occurs in Ilara's small room. The tension that had permeated the space during the creation of the pea-sized mystery seems to dissipate, replaced by the familiar, focused calm of her usual artistic endeavors. You watch as she carefully selects a new canvas. This time, it's a particularly smooth, unbroken hazelnut shell. It feels like returning to an old, comfortable friend after a rather strange and demanding houseguest has finally departed. No more clandestine messages for now, just the pure, unadulterated joy of painting a landscape so tiny you'd need a fairy's magnifying glass to truly appreciate it. She begins to mix her colors, her movements unhurried, almost leisurely. A vibrant cerulean blue for the sky, a touch of ochre and sienna for the gentle rolling hills she plans to depict. It's a scene of pastoral beauty, a miniature escape into an idealized countryside. This return to more conventional, for her anyway, subject matter highlights a mainstream historical fact. While some Renaissance artists pushed boundaries with subject or style, many also catered to popular tastes, producing works that were beautiful, devotional, or simply pleasant to look at. Ilara, for all her unique specialization, was likely no different. Not every piece could be a high-stakes political statement on a legume. Sometimes you just want to paint a pretty picture on a nut. It's all about balance. As she works, the morning sounds of the city begin to filter in more clearly. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the calls of vendors in the market, the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestones. It's a reminder that Ilara, despite the almost hermetic focus her art requires, is still part of this vibrant, bustling world. Her tiny creations are windows, not just into imaginary landscapes or intricate designs, but into a particular kind of human endeavor that finds immense value in the small, the detailed, the patiently crafted. You wonder if anyone walking by her window ever imagines the microscopic universes being born just a few feet away. Probably not. They're likely more concerned with avoiding rogue chamber pots being emptied from above. Ah, Renaissance city life. Now for a truly bizarre, or at least endearingly eccentric, detail from the fringe of art history. Tales exist of collectors who would commission entire miniature dollhouse-like scenes, but with the rooms being different nutshells, each meticulously furnished and decorated. Imagine a walnut shell as a grand hall, a pistachio as a study, an almond as a bedchamber. Ilara, with her skill, could have been the interior designer for the world's smallest, nuttiest palace. It's a wonderfully whimsical thought. Tiny people living in tiny nut houses, probably complaining about the drafts. Darling, did you remember to seal the crack in the pecan? I think a gnat got in. Ilara pauses, holding the hazelnut up to the light, her head tilted in critical assessment. She adds a microscopic speck of white to suggest a glint of sunlight on a distant stream. It's perfect. This brings us to a final, lingering scholarly debate for our journey. What was the ultimate purpose or perceived function of such intensely intricate, almost hidden art? Were these pieces primarily displays of technical virtuosity meant to astound and entertain? Were they objects of private devotion or contemplation, their small scale encouraging an intimate personal interaction? Or were they, in some cases, simply the result of an artist finding their unique passion and pursuing it, regardless of mainstream trends or critical understanding? Historians still ponder the various motivations behind these miniature marvels. For Ilera, you sense it's a combination of all these: a means of income, a profound personal expression, and a constant quiet challenge to capture the world in a grain of sand, or in this case, a nutshell. She works for a few more hours, the hazelnut landscape growing richer and more detailed with every delicate stroke. There's no sense of urgency now, just the steady, practiced rhythm of creation. You see her smile, a small, almost imperceptible upturn of her lips, as she adds a final detail: a tiny bird, no bigger than a pinprick, soaring in the painted sky. It's a touch of life, a spark of joy in her miniature world. As the day wears on, you feel your own awareness of her tiny studio beginning to soften, the details becoming a little less sharp. Alara herself seems to recede slightly, her image becoming a little more dreamlike. Her legacy, you realize, isn't just in the physical objects she creates, but in the dedication, the patience, the almost meditative focus she embodies. She represents a quiet corner of a boisterous era, a testament to the idea that art can be powerful and profound, even when it's small enough to be cradled in the palm of your hand or painted on the discarded shell of a nut. Her story, a tiny marvel in itself, begins to fade, like one of her delicate watercolors exposed too long to the sun, leaving behind a sense of quiet wonder. Now, as Ilara continues her timeless work, her form becoming a soft silhouette against the gentle light of her window, it's time for us to let these images gently drift. The sounds of her small studio, the faint scent of oil and old wood, begin to recede, replaced by the comfortable quiet of your own space. The rhythmic scratching of her finest brush on shell becomes a soothing whisper, a gentle sound to carry you towards rest. The intense focus in her eyes now softens, mirroring the way your own eyelids might be starting to feel a little heavier, a little more ready for peace. Let the image of those tiny, perfect worlds, nestled within the humble curve of a nutshell, remind you of the beauty that can be found in the smallest details, in the quiet moments of dedicated creation. Feel any tension in your own shoulders, your neck, your jaw begin to soften and release, just as Alara might stretch after hours of painstaking work, feeling that satisfying release of effort. The colors on her palette, the deep blues, the earthy ochres, the vibrant greens, begin to swirl and blend, becoming less distinct, more like a gentle watercolor wash. Allow your own thoughts to soften and blend in the same way, letting go of the sharp edges of the day. The faint light from her window, which guided her intricate work, now becomes a soft, diffused glow, like the gentle light that might be filtering into your own room, or the soft darkness behind your eyelids. There are no more demands, no more challenges, just the quiet satisfaction of a story told, a journey completed. The tiny distant sounds of Renaissance Florence fade completely, replaced by the gentle rhythmic sounds you've chosen for your own rest. Perhaps the soft whir of a fan or the quiet hum of the night outside your window. Let these sounds be your anchor, grounding you in the present moment, in the comfort of your bed. Ilara's world of miniature marvels has served its purpose, and now only calm remains. Hey everyone, tonight we're setting sail on a sea of, well, mostly salt water, but also a whole lot of peculiar beliefs. Imagine you're on a long voyage, weeks from land, the only thing between you and the crushing depths, a few planks of wood, and a whole lot of hope. Now imagine you idly start whistling a jaunty tune to pass the time. Suddenly, the grizzled old boatswain gives you a look that could curdle milk, maybe even threatens to toss you overboard with the day's garbage. Why? Because you, my friend, were whistling up a storm. We're diving into the fascinating, sometimes baffling, and often downright strange world of sailor superstitions during the age of sail. Seriously, with the food, the discipline, and the constant threat of drowning or disease, you probably wouldn't have survived this era if a poorly timed whistle was your biggest concern. But for these sailors, these beliefs were as real as the deck beneath their feet. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small click for you, but a mighty gust in my sails, so to speak. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these bedtime tales travel across the globe, from one ocean of sleepy people to another. Now turn down the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You feel the gentle, almost rhythmic roll of the deck beneath your feet, a constant companion that's either lulling you to sleep or making you vaguely nauseous. It's dark, the only light coming from a few swaying lanterns casting long, dancing shadows, and the breathtaking canopy of stars overhead, so brilliant and numerous they seem to mock the tiny, fragile vessel you call home. You're aboard a British merchantman, say, sometime in the late 18th century, a few weeks out from Bristol, bound for the Caribbean. The air is thick with the smell of salt, damp wood, tar, bilge water, and something vaguely fishy that you try not to think too much about. The creak and groan of the ship's timbers is a constant symphony, a language you're slowly learning to interpret, a sign of fair winds, or a warning of stress on the hull. You're still what they call a green hand, new to this life at sea, and the sheer number of unwritten rules is staggering. Most of them, you're discovering, have less to do with seamanship and more to do with not angering the fates, the sea, or more immediately, the older, saltier members of the crew. Just yesterday, you learned the hard way about whistling. You were feeling a bit cheerful, a rare occurrence on a diet of hardtack and salted beef, and started to whistle a little ditty. The first mate, a man whose face looked like a well-used nautical chart, rounded on you so fast you nearly swallowed your tongue. "Stow that noise, lad," he'd barked, "unless you fancy a gale tearing our sails to ribbons." Whistling, you were sternly informed, was like sending a direct invitation to the wind gods to unleash their fury. It was considered a direct challenge to the elements, or perhaps to the spirits of the air themselves. Only the cook, it was sometimes grudgingly permitted, might whistle to encourage a gentle breeze if the ship was becalmed, but even then it was a risky business. It's like daring your internet provider to go down by boasting about your amazing connection speed. You just don't tempt fate. This belief about whistling is a prime example of the superstitions that governed life at sea. A mainstream historical fact is that life in the age of sail was incredibly perilous and unpredictable. Sailors faced storms, disease, piracy, accidents, and the constant threat of getting lost or shipwrecked. In the face of such overwhelming uncertainty, superstitions provided a semblance of control, a way to make sense of a chaotic world, and to try and influence forces that were far beyond their power. If you did X, Y might happen, or more importantly, be avoided. You lean against the rail, looking out at the dark, swirling water. An older sailor, maybe a man named Finn with calloused hands and eyes that have seen too many horizons, sidles up beside you. He's taken a bit of a shine to you, perhaps seeing a younger version of himself in your bewildered expressions. He might offer you a swig from his flask, something that tastes vaguely of rum and regret, and then, in a low voice, start to share some of the sea's lore. He'll tell you that the sea is a living thing, a temperamental deity, and she has her favorites and her dislikes. For instance, spilling wine on the deck was sometimes seen as an offering, but spilling rum? That was just a waste of good grog and probably bad luck. One bizarre detail he might share is about bananas. Apparently, a ship carrying bananas was considered incredibly unlucky. Some said it was because crates of bananas often harbored venomous spiders, a rather practical concern. Others claimed that fermentation of the fruit produced toxic fumes. But many sailors just knew, with a certainty that brooked no argument, that bananas on board meant voyages would be plagued by calms, storms, or even death. Entire cargoes were sometimes thrown overboard if ill fortune struck a banana boat. You can imagine the merchant who owned those bananas wasn't too pleased. But, my profits? Sorry, sir, the vibes were off. Finn might then mention the ongoing scholarly debate about the origins of many of these maritime superstitions. Historians still argue whether they were remnants of ancient pagan beliefs, practical wisdom disguised as folklore, or simply the collective anxieties of isolated communities creating their own elaborate belief systems. For example, the idea of femme fatale, or women bringing bad luck to a ship, is a common trope. Some argue this was pure misogyny, a way to keep women out of the male-dominated sphere of seafaring. Others suggest it might have stemmed from the practical concern that the presence of women could cause distractions or discord among the crew on long voyages. Though ironically, many ships had female figureheads, often bare-chested, which were considered good luck, meant to calm the seas with their gaze. Go figure. The logic is about as clear as bilge water after a storm. As Finn talks, you feel the vastness of the ocean around you, the immense power held within its depths. It's easy to understand out here how a belief in unseen forces, in luck and omens, could take such a powerful hold. The line between the known and the unknown is as thin as the horizon, and anything that offered a sense of agency, a way to navigate the terrifying uncertainties, would be clung to like a lifeline. You shiver, and it's not just from the night breeze. The sea, Finn seems to imply, is always watching, always listening, and you'd better mind your manners. Finn takes another pull from his flask, the faint scent of cheap spirits briefly overpowering the salty air. He gestures out towards the inky blackness where the waves meet the sky. She sees everything, lad, he murmurs, his voice raspy like old rope. And she's got her messengers too, You figure he's not talking about the Royal Mail. He means the creatures of the sea and sky, each one carrying potential portents, good or ill. For instance, the sight of dolphins or porpoises playing in the ship's bow wave was almost universally considered a sign of good luck and fair winds. These creatures were seen as friendly, intelligent, almost like companions on the lonely voyage, guiding the ship safely. Some sailors even believed they were the spirits of drowned mariners, now acting as guardians. If a dolphin followed your ship, you were golden. If it suddenly veered away, well, you might want to double check the lifeboats. But then there was the albatross. You've heard whispers about the albatross. Killing one was maritime taboo number one, a guaranteed recipe for disaster, inviting terrible storms, ghostly apparitions, or the ship being cursed to sail endlessly, crewed by the damned. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner didn't invent this superstition. It powerfully amplified a belief that was already deeply entrenched. The albatross, with its massive wingspan, could follow ships for days, seemingly without effort, and was often seen as a creature existing between worlds, a bearer of souls, or a direct link to the spiritual realm. Harming one was like poking a divine entity in the eye with a pointy stick. Probably not a good career move for an aspiring sailor. Then there are the less majestic, but equally significant, shipboard creatures. A cat on board was generally considered good luck. Not only did they take care of the rat population, a constant gnawing menace that could destroy provisions and even gnaw on the sleeping crew. Yes, really. But they were also thought to predict the weather. A playful cat meant good weather. A cat that seemed agitated or spent a lot of time grooming its ears was supposedly a sign that a storm was brewing. It's a mainstream historical fact that ships in the age of sail were ecosystems unto themselves, with a constant battle against vermin. Rats could decimate food stores and damage cargo, so a good mouser was worth its weight in gold, or at least in slightly less weevil-infested biscuits. Some captains even had official ship's cats on the manifest. You imagine the job interview. Can you catch rats? Are you fluffy? Welcome aboard. Finn then lowers his voice, sharing a more bizarre detail. Never, he says, his eyes glinting in the lantern light. Never bring flowers onto a ship, especially not before setting sail, and for the love of all that's holy, no lilacs. Flowers, beautiful as they were on land, were associated with funerals and wreaths, potent symbols of mortality. Bringing them aboard was like inviting death to join the voyage. Lilacs, in particular, were considered the unluckiest of all, though the exact reason is lost to time. Perhaps their scent was associated with graveyards, or maybe some poor sailor just had a really bad experience with a lilac bush and the story stuck. It's the kind of rule that makes you wonder who the first person was to try and bring a bouquet onto a warship, and what exactly happened to make everyone else go, nope, never again. This naturally leads to a scholarly debate. How much did these superstitions vary between different cultures and navies? While some beliefs, like the albatross taboo, seem to have been widespread among Western sailors, did a Spanish mariner share all the same fears as an English one or a Dutch privateer? Historians still piece together evidence from sailors' journals, logs, and court records to understand the regional nuances and the cross-pollination of these beliefs. Did a French sailor care about bananas, Or was that a uniquely Anglo Caribbean phobia? It's likely there was a core set of greatest hits superstitions, with local variations and additions thrown in, like a nautical folklore playlist that changed depending on the port. You ponder this, the vast, dark ocean stretching out before you. It's not just the fear of the unknown, but the fear of offending the unknown that seems to drive so much of this. Finn continues, explaining that even certain words were taboo. You couldn't say drowned for fear of inviting that fate. Instead, you'd say someone was in Davy Jones's locker. You avoided saying goodbye when leaving port, opting for farewell, as goodbye sounded too final. And whistling, as you now knew, was practically a declaration of war against the weather. It's like a really intense, high-stakes version of Don't Step on a Crack or You'll Break Your Mother's Back, only instead of your mom's chiropractor bills, you're dealing with a hurricane. The ship itself, Finn explains, was often thought to have a personality, a spirit. Sailors would talk to their ships, pat their rails, and a well-maintained, happy ship was thought to look after her crew. This anthropomorphism extended to the figurehead at the prow, usually a female form or a powerful animal. The figurehead wasn't just decoration, it was the ship's eyes, guiding her safely through storms and towards unseen lands. If the figurehead was damaged or lost, it was a terrible omen. You suddenly feel a strange affection for the creaking timbers around you, this wooden beast carrying you across the endless water. Maybe patting the rail isn't such a silly idea after all. You make a mental note. Be nice to the boat, avoid bananas, don't kill any large seabirds, and for goodness sake, keep your whistling to yourself. This seafaring life is more complicated than you thought. The stars above seem to twinkle with ancient amusement, having witnessed countless generations of sailors trying to negotiate their passage with the capricious powers of the deep. The conversation with Finn, your grizzled mentor in maritime folklore, eventually winds down as he heads off to his watch, leaving you alone again with your thoughts and the vast, sighing ocean. The ship, a tiny speck of human endeavor in this immense wilderness of water, plows steadily onward, its timbers groaning like an old man settling into his favorite chair. You find yourself more attuned now to the subtle cues of this wooden world, and more aware of the invisible web of beliefs that holds the crew together, for better or worse. It's not just about avoiding bad luck, it's also about actively courting good fortune, a constant, low-level hum of ritual and observance that underpins the daily grind. One of the first things you probably noticed is how many sailors have personal charms or amulets. A mainstream historical fact is that the daily life of a sailor was filled with hard labor, strict discipline, and the constant threat of sudden death from storms, accidents, or disease. Mortality rates were high. In such an environment, anything that offered a sliver of protection or hope was embraced. You might see a sailor with a pierced earlobe. A common belief was that it improved eyesight, or that the gold earring could pay for a proper burial if his body washed ashore. Some carried a caul, a piece of the amniotic membrane that sometimes covers a newborn's head, as it was believed to protect against drowning. These weren't just sentimental trinkets, they were serious talismans, each with a story and a perceived power. It's like today, how some people won't leave the house without their favorite lucky socks for a big presentation, only instead of a PowerPoint bombing, you're worried about being eaten by a kraken. Finn might have told you about unlucky days to set sail. Friday was almost universally considered a bad day to begin a voyage. This superstition is so enduring that even today, some people feel a bit iffy about starting new ventures on a Friday. Its origins are often linked to Christian tradition, Christ's crucifixion on a Friday, but it likely predates that, tapping into older beliefs about inauspicious days. Starting a long and perilous journey on such a day was seen as deliberately thumbing your nose at fate. Thursday, on the other hand, was often considered a good day, possibly named after Thor, the Norse god of thunder and storms. Perhaps setting out on his day was a way of seeking his protection, or just hoping he'd be busy elsewhere. Let's leave on Thor's day, lads. Maybe he'll be too hungover from a godly revel to bother us. And then there are the rituals. You might have witnessed the crossing the line ceremony when your ship first crossed the equator. This elaborate, often raucous ritual is a well-documented tradition where shellbacks, those who have crossed before, initiate the polywogs, or first-timers. King Neptune himself, often a costumed senior sailor, presides over the ceremony, which could involve bizarre mock trials, dousings with seawater, and symbolic shaving. While it served as a form of rough entertainment and a way to bond the crew, it was also deeply symbolic, a rite of passage acknowledging the transition into a different, often more dangerous, part of the maritime world. It was a way to appease the sea god and ensure safe passage through his domain. Think of it as a very salty, very strange fraternity hazing, but with more mythological significance and a higher chance of encountering flying fish. A particularly bizarre or obscure detail concerns the ship's bell. The bell, used to mark the watches and signal emergencies, was often treated with a degree of reverence. It was sometimes said that if a ship's bell rang without a human hand touching it, it was a death knell, foretelling the loss of a crew member. Some bells even had names, and sailors might polish them with particular care, almost as if tending to a sacred object. You can imagine a sudden, inexplicable clang in the middle of a calm night, sending shivers down the spine of even the hardiest sailor. Did you hear that? Hear what? I didn't hear anything. You didn't hear anything. Nobody heard anything. La la la. This leads to a scholarly debate about the psychological function of these superstitions. Did they genuinely reduce anxiety by providing a sense of control and predictability in a life shot through with danger? Or did they, in some ways, amplify anxiety by creating a whole new set of things to worry about? If you're constantly on the lookout for bad omens, a single magpie seen before sailing, a rat leaving the ship, the wrong kind of cloud formation, does that make you more vigilant or just more stressed? Academics argue both sides. Some believe these rituals and taboos provided a framework for coping with overwhelming fear, channeling anxieties into specific actions or avoidances. Others suggest that they could create a kind of magical thinking that might sometimes lead to poor decision-making if practical concerns were overridden by superstitious fears. It's a complex question, and the answer probably varies from sailor to sailor and from superstition to superstition. You watch as a fellow sailor carefully touches the collar of his jacket before climbing the rigging into the darkness above. You'd heard that touching the collar of a sailor was sometimes considered good luck, though the origins of that one are as murky as the bottom of the ocean. Perhaps it was just a way of acknowledging a shared fate, a small gesture of solidarity. Out here, on the endless rolling sea, with only the creaking wood and the sigh of the wind for company, you realize these beliefs aren't just quaint stories. They are the invisible rigging that holds together the psychology of men balanced precariously between the devil and the deep blue sea. And you, the green hand, are slowly but surely learning the ropes of this spectral framework. The night wears on, and the vast, star-dusted sky above seems to press down on your small ship, a silent witness to the human dramas unfolding on its decks. You find yourself on watch, pacing slowly to keep warm, the dampness of the sea air seeping into your bones. The lanterns cast flickering pools of light, leaving much of the ship in deep shadow, shadows that seem to writhe and shift with the vessel's motion, easily transforming into something more sinister in the tired mind. It's in these quiet, lonely hours that the darker superstitions, the ones concerning death and the supernatural, feel most potent. Finn or another old salt might have told you about Davy Jones, that most famous denizen of the deep, a sort of sailor's devil or malign sea spirit who presided over the souls of drowned men. Davy Jones's locker wasn't just a euphemism for the bottom of the sea. It was a very real, very feared place. A mainstream historical fact is that death was an intimate companion on these voyages. Disease, accidents, storms, and combat all contributed to a high mortality rate. Burials at sea were common, the deceased sewn into their hammock with the last stitch through the nose. To make sure they were truly dead, a grimly practical detail, and weighted down. The final committal to the waves was a somber affair, and you can imagine how the thought of that cold, dark locker, ruled by a malevolent entity, preyed on the minds of those left behind. Sailors had all sorts of beliefs about predicting or warding off death. You might hear that if a candle flame suddenly turned blue or sputtered erratically for no apparent reason, it was a sign that a ghost was present, possibly one looking to choose its next companion from among the crew. The eerie glow of St. Elmo's fire, a weather phenomenon where static electricity causes plasma to discharge from pointed objects like mastheads, was often viewed with a mixture of awe and trepidation. While some saw it as a good omen, a sign of divine protection, named after Saint Erasmus of Formia, a patron saint of sailors, others believed it was the souls of the dead come to warn of an impending storm, or worse, to lure the ship to its doom. Look, lads, the masts are on fire, but a holy fire. Or maybe it's just Steve, from accountant back to haunt us about those missing rum rations. One particularly bizarre detail Finn might share in a hushed tone concerns sharks. Sharks, often called sea dogs by sailors, were naturally feared for their predatory nature. But the superstition went deeper. It was widely believed that sharks would unerringly follow a ship that was doomed, or one on which someone was about to die, as if they could sense death approaching. If a shark was seen trailing the vessel for days, especially if someone was sick or injured, a palpable gloom would descend upon the crew. It was as if the ocean itself was sending its undertaker. Trying to catch or harm these waiting sharks was, of course, considered terribly bad luck, likely to hasten the inevitable. Imagine the horror of seeing a dorsal fin slicing through the wake, day after day. It would be like having a hearse constantly parked outside your house. This inevitably leads to a scholarly debate. How were these complex belief systems transmitted and enforced among sailors who were often transient, multinational, and from diverse backgrounds? Was it through oral tradition, passed down from older sailors to new hands like yourself? Were there enforcers on board, like the boatswain or certain respected older crewmen, who made sure the taboos were observed? Historians examine sailors' memoirs, ship logs, and even court martial records, for when things went really wrong, to trace the spread and staying power of these beliefs. It seems likely that the shared dangers and isolation of shipboard life created a fertile ground for these ideas to take root and spread, becoming part of the unwritten code of the sea, a lingua franca of fear and hope that transcended nationality. If enough grumpy old salts told you not to do something, you generally didn't do it, especially if they had a belaying pin handy. And then there were the ghost stories. Every ship, it seemed, had its phantom. The Flying Dutchman is the most famous, of course, the ghostly galleon doomed to sail the seas forever, its appearance a dire portent to any who sighted it. But individual ships often had their own spectral residents: the ghost of a sailor lost overboard in a storm, a murdered captain, or a mysterious lady in white wailing in the rigging. These tales, shared in hushed tones during the dog watch or in the dim light of the forecastle, served not only as entertainment, but also as cautionary tales, reinforcing the ship's lore and the many dangers, both natural and supernatural, that lurked just beyond the lantern's glow. You can almost hear the creak of a door that no one opened, the faint whisper on the wind that sounds a little too much like your name. Just the wind, you tell yourself. Definitely just the wind, and not the ghost of Old Man Hemlock looking for his missing teeth. The world of a sailor in the age of sail was one where the veil between the living and the dead, the natural and the supernatural, was incredibly thin. The vast, empty ocean, the long, dark nights, the constant presence of death, it all conspired to create a potent atmosphere where such beliefs could flourish. You pull your collar tighter, glancing nervously at the dark shapes at the edge of your vision. It's one thing to hear these stories. It's another to live them, surrounded by men who believe them with every fiber of their being, on a tiny ship adrift on an endless haunted sea. As your voyage continues, days bleeding into weeks, the ship becomes your entire universe. The relentless routine of watch and work, punctuated by meager meals and snatched moments of rest, grinds on. You've grown accustomed to the taste of salt in everything, the ever-present dampness, and the surprisingly diverse vocabulary of curses the boatswain can unleash for even minor infractions. You've also become a reluctant connoisseur of the ship's unwritten rules, those invisible guardrails against misfortune. You've learned, for example, that it's not just what you say, but who you say it about, and even the names of things that can carry weight. You might notice that certain individuals on board are considered inherently lucky or unlucky. Perhaps there's a sailor who has survived multiple shipwrecks. He might be seen as a Jonah, a bringer of bad luck to any vessel he joins, and shunned by some. Conversely, a sailor who joined the ship just as a spate of ill fortune ended might be hailed as a lucky charm. This idea extended to the ship itself. Some vessels gained reputations as unlucky ships, plagued by accidents, slow voyages, or constant repairs, while others were known as lucky or fast ships, attracting the best crews and fetching higher prices for their cargo or services. It's a mainstream historical fact that the reputation of a ship and its captain could significantly impact its success. A captain known for safe and speedy voyages would find it easier to recruit skilled sailors and secure lucrative contracts. A lucky ship was a valuable asset. It's like choosing a used car today. You might avoid one with a history of breaking down, even if the mechanic swears it's fine now. This one just feels wrong, you'd say, just like a sailor eyeing a notoriously unlucky brig. Then there's the complex and often contradictory world of superstitions surrounding women. As Finn might have grimly joked, a woman on board is worse than a dozen rats, and twice as likely to sink ye, unless she's made of wood and nailed to the prow. You've already heard about the general taboo against women on ships, seen as distractions or harbingers of storms and ill luck. Yet paradoxically, many things associated with women were considered vital for the ship's well-being. The ship itself was always referred to as she, and sailors spoke of her moods and temperament. The aforementioned female figurehead was essential. Some sailors even carried tokens from loved ones, a lock of hair, a ribbon, believing these feminine objects offered protection. It's a classic case of wanting the symbolic protection of the feminine while fearing its actual presence. We need her gentle spirit to guide us, lads, but for heaven's sake, keep her actual person off the gangplank. One particularly bizarre detail involves the naming of the ship. It was considered extremely bad luck to change a ship's name. If a vessel was captured or sold and renamed, a complex denaming and renaming ceremony was sometimes performed to appease the gods of the sea and the ship's original spirit, lest she take offense and lead her new crew to ruin. This might involve symbolically erasing the old name from the ship's consciousness, sometimes by writing it on a piece of paper, putting it in a box, and ceremonially throwing it overboard with an incantation. Only then could the new name be safely applied. Failure to do this properly could mean the ship would forever be haunted by its old identity, or worse, simply refuse to answer to its new moniker in a storm. Imagine trying to get your smart speaker to respond after you've changed its wake word without telling it properly. Pure chaos. This brings up a scholarly debate. How did formal religion interact with these deeply ingrained folk beliefs? Most sailors in the age of sail, particularly in European navies and merchant fleets, were nominally Christian. They attended divine services on Sundays if a chaplain was aboard or the captain led prayers. Yet these same men readily embraced superstitions that often had pagan undertones or seemed to contradict Christian teachings. Scholars argue whether these two belief systems existed in parallel, compartmentalized in the sailors' minds, or if they blended into a unique maritime syncretism. Did a sailor pray to God for safety and then also leave an offering for Neptune just to cover all his bases? It's likely a complex mix. When facing a hurricane, you probably weren't too picky about whose divine intervention you solicited. Anyone up there listening? A little help, please? I'll build a church or a really nice seashell grotto. Your choice. You also learn about the power attributed to certain objects or actions. For instance, losing a bucket or a mop overboard was often considered a very bad omen, signaling that someone from the crew would soon follow. Why a mop? Who knows? Perhaps it was just the sheer annoyance of losing a vital cleaning tool that morphed into something more sinister. Stirring tea or coffee with a knife or fork instead of a spoon was also frowned upon, thought to stir up trouble or storms. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder about the first guy who did it. Old man Fitzwilliam stirred his grog with a dirk once, and next thing you know, we were fighting off a kraken and a customs inspection. Coincidence? I think not. The very wood of the ship was sometimes imbued with superstitious significance. A piece of wood from a gallows or a coffin, if incorporated into the ship's structure, unbeknownst to most, one would hope, was thought to make the ship sail faster, particularly if she was a pirate vessel or privateer looking for a supernatural edge. It's a grim thought. You're floating home potentially harboring relics of death for a speed advantage. The sea was a place where the line between the sacred and the profane, the lucky and the terrifying, was constantly being redrawn by the waves of belief and fear. Each creak of the timbers under your feet could be the ship settling, or it could be something else entirely, a whisper from the wood itself, reminding you of the unseen world that sailed with you. The days grow shorter, or perhaps it just feels that way as the ship sails further into less charted waters, or maybe just less friendly latitudes. The wind has a keener bite, and the older sailors like Finn seem to squint at the horizon with a more practiced, wary eye. You've absorbed so many superstitions now, it's like you've downloaded a whole new operating system for your brain, the Maritime Anxiety 2.0 suite. You find yourself unconsciously avoiding stepping on certain deck seams or humming certain tunes. It's insidious, this folklore. One last thing Finn might have impressed upon you is the idea of the sea demanding its due. This wasn't always about grand sacrifices, but small acknowledgments. A mainstream historical fact is that sailors often had little personal wealth, but what they did have, they sometimes shared with the ocean, intentionally or not. Dropping something valuable overboard by accident might be seen not just as a loss, but as the sea taking its toll. Some sailors, before a particularly dangerous passage or in a storm, might discreetly toss a small coin or a button into the waves, a tiny offering to appease whatever powers held sway over their fate. It's like a slightly less dramatic version of throwing coins in a fountain, except instead of wishing for a new bike, you're wishing not to be swallowed by a sentient waterspout. A truly bizarre extension of this was the belief by some pirates that a silver earring could not only pay for a burial, but if offered to the sea before death, might persuade the waves to spare you in a shipwreck. Quite the gamble. Here you go, Mr. Ocean. Have a shiny. Now, about that whole drowning me thing. This ties into a scholarly debate about whether these offerings were seen as bribes to fickle gods or more as acts of respect, an acknowledgement of the sea's immense power and the sailor's humble place within its domain. The intent, as always with belief, is difficult to parse centuries later. And so, with your head full of lucky cats, unlucky bananas, whistling winds, and the ever-watchful eyes of the deep, you feel the ship press on. The journey itself has become a living tapestry of these beliefs, each knot and thread a story, a fear, a hope. Act 2 of your voyage, with its deep dive into the sailor's psyche, draws to a close, leaving you to wonder what tempests, real or superstitious, await in the chapters yet to come. The atmosphere on board has shifted. You can taste it in the air, a metallic tang that old Finn says heralds a proper blow. The sea, once a rhythmic, almost soothing companion, has grown restless, its sighs turning into growls, the waves capped with increasingly angry white foam. The sky, too, has transformed from a clear, indifferent blue to a bruised, ominous palette of grays and purples. You watch the crew, their faces etched with a familiar anxiety, but now it's sharper, more focused. The usual banter is subdued, replaced by curt commands and the hurried, purposeful movements of men preparing for a battle against the elements. This is where all those accumulated superstitions, all those little rituals, and deeply held beliefs either prove their worth in a sailor's mind or are starkly contrasted with the brutal reality of nature's fury. A mainstream historical fact is that handling a square-rigged ship in a heavy storm was an incredibly demanding and dangerous task. It required immense skill, strength, and coordination from the entire crew to reduce sail, secure and lash down anything loose, and try to keep the vessel from being overwhelmed by wind and waves. Captains and officers relied on their knowledge of seamanship, their understanding of their ship's capabilities, and often sheer guts. But even the most experienced mariner knew that sometimes survival was out of their hands. It's like trying to navigate a rush hour freeway on a unicycle during an earthquake. Skill helps, but luck plays a huge part. As the first fat raindrops begin to splatter on the deck, you see some of the older sailors touching their personal amulets, their lips moving in silent prayers, or perhaps murmuring incantations learned from generations past. Finn, you notice, has tied a small, knotted piece of cord to the mainmast, a wind knot, supposedly to bind the storm's ferocity. The efficacy of such charms was, of course, entirely a matter of faith, but in moments like these, faith was a precious commodity. If the ship had a cat, its behavior would be watched intently. Is it hiding? A bad sign. Is it inexplicably calm? Perhaps a glimmer of hope. You almost wish you'd paid more attention to that mangy tabby now. Speak to us, O wise feline. Will we make it to Tuesday? One of the more bizarre details you might witness in the rising panic is a sailor surreptitiously scratching the leeward side of the mainmast. This was sometimes done with the belief that it would claw back the wind or appease whatever spirit was riding the storm. Others might avoid pointing directly at the approaching storm clouds, as if doing so would draw its attention or anger it further, like making eye contact with a particularly grumpy bear. It's the kind of desperate, almost childlike gesture that speaks volumes about the terror these men faced. If I don't look at it, maybe it won't see me, except it is a 50-foot wave. This brings us to a poignant scholarly debate. In moments of extreme crisis at sea, how did practical seamanship and superstitious belief interact? Did the reliance on charms and rituals sometimes hinder effective action? Or did these beliefs, by providing some psychological comfort or a shared sense of purpose, actually help crews endure unimaginable stress and perform their duties more cohesively? Some accounts suggest that captains occasionally had to sternly remind crews to focus on their tasks rather than resorting to panicked superstitions. Yet others imply that these shared beliefs created a vital sense of solidarity. It's likely a complex interplay. When you're facing a wall of water the size of a small office building, a bit of shared ritual might be the only thing keeping you from complete despair, even if it doesn't actually change the weather. The wind howls now, a mournful, furious shriek through the rigging. The ship groans and protests as mountainous waves crash over the bow, sending plumes of icy water sweeping across the deck. You cling to a lifeline, soaked to the bone, the salt stinging your eyes. The captain is bellowing orders through a speaking trumpet, his voice barely audible above the tempest's roar. You see men struggling with frozen ropes, their knuckles raw, their faces grim. Someone near you shouts that they saw an albatross earlier, circling high above just before the sky turned black. A murmur of dread ripples through those who hear it, even above the storm's din. Coincidence? Or a clear, feathered harbinger of doom? At this point, you're willing to blame anything with wings. The lanterns have long since been extinguished or smashed, plunging the world into a terrifying, chaotic darkness, illuminated only by flashes of lightning that briefly, starkly, reveal the maelstrom around you. Every creak of the timbers sounds like a death knell. Every wave that crashes down feels like the sea trying to swallow you whole. This is it. This is the test. Will the ship hold? Will the crew's skill, their courage, and perhaps their collective belief in a few lucky charms and well-placed knots be enough to see them through the raging anger of the ocean? The night is long, and the storm, like a malevolent entity, seems determined to claim its due. The storm rages for what feels like an eternity. You lose all track of time, your existence narrowed to the next wave, the next gust of wind, the desperate struggle to hold on, to keep the ship afloat, to simply survive. The air is filled with the roar of the ocean, the shriek of the wind, and the splintering crack of timber as the ship endures a brutal pounding. You see fear in the eyes of even the saltiest veterans, but also a grim determination. Every man aboard is working at the edge of their endurance, driven by instinct, training, and perhaps by a prayer to whatever god or lucky charm they hold dear. That wind knot, fin tied to the mast? It's probably long gone, but you catch him occasionally glancing towards where it was, as if its memory alone offers some comfort. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the fury begins to subside. The wind doesn't drop suddenly, but its shrieks lessen to moans, then to mournful sighs. The waves, though still immense, lose some of their terrifying malice, their crests less jagged. The rain softens from a violent assault to a steady, almost cleansing downpour. Slowly, agonizingly, the ship, battered and bruised, begins to claw its way back from the brink. You can hardly believe it. It's like waking from a violent, feverish nightmare. As a watery gray dawn finally breaks, it reveals a scene of devastation. The decks are a tangled mess of ropes and debris. One of the smaller masts has splintered, sails are shredded to ribbons, and the ship lists heavily to one side, water sloshing in the hold. But she's still afloat. You and most of the crew are still alive. A mainstream historical fact is that surviving a major storm in the age of sail was a testament to both the resilience of the ship's construction and the skill of her crew. Post-storm, the immediate priorities would be damage assessment, pumping out water, jury-rigging repairs to masts and sails, and trying to ascertain their new position, as storms often blew ships wildly off course. It was a period of intense, exhausting labor, often with depleted supplies and exhausted men. You see sailors soaked and shivering, some with minor injuries, slowly begin to take stock. There's a shared look of dazed disbelief, of profound weariness, but also a flicker of something else, survival. And now, the superstitions reemerge, reinterpreted in the light of their ordeal. Did the lucky charms work? Well, you're alive, aren't you? That albatross someone saw? Maybe it was a warning, but you heeded it by not deliberately angering it further, and it decided to let you off the hook this time. The logic is flexible when you want it to be. It's like when your computer finally starts working after you've tried everything, and you credit the last completely random thing you did. It was definitely unplugging and replugging the mouse that fixed the internet. One bizarre, almost touching detail you might observe is a sailor carefully retrieving a small, sodden object from his shirt, perhaps a tiny carved bird or a coin bent out of shape. He kisses it, a silent thank you. Some might even make a new vow, a promise to a patron saint or a sea deity if they ever set foot on dry land again. There were even tales of crews collectively deciding to forgo a certain ration, like their grog, for a set period as a form of thanksgiving, or to offer the first fish caught after the storm back to the sea. It's a very human need to find meaning and to express gratitude, even if it's to the same forces that nearly destroyed you. Thanks for not killing us, Mr. Storm. We'll skip happy hour for a week in your honor. This brings us to a final scholarly debate for our voyage. What was the long-term psychological impact on sailors who endured such repeated traumas, and how did their shared belief systems contribute to their resilience or their suffering? Did the constant invocation of luck, fate, and supernatural intervention help them process the horrors they witnessed, or did it trap them in a cycle of anxiety? It's likely a bit of both, and so shared rituals and beliefs can foster strong communal bonds and provide a framework for understanding chaos. But the weight of constant fear and the capricious nature of their rules for survival must have taken a toll. You look at Finn, his face even more deeply lined than before, his eyes holding a distant, haunted look, and you realize this life leaves indelible marks, both on the body and the soul. The captain, after a grim assessment of the damage, orders the crew to begin repairs. There's a sense of shared purpose, but it's quieter now, more subdued. The storm has stripped away the bravado, leaving a raw, weary core. Yet as the men work, you hear a few familiar phrases, a few nods to the old beliefs. Someone finds the ship's cat, bedraggled but alive, emerging from some miraculous hiding place. "See? Lucky cat!" someone exclaims, and a few weak smiles are exchanged. It's a small thing, but it's something. As your battered ship limps towards the nearest friendly port, or perhaps just continues its voyage with patched sails and a weary hope, you reflect on the journey. You've seen how, in the face of overwhelming power and unpredictable danger, humans will always create systems of meaning, ways to feel a sense of agency, however illusory. The superstitions of these age of sail sailors, born from the salt and spray, the fear and the wonder of the vast ocean, are a testament to that enduring human spirit. They were their companions through the long nights, their shield against the unknown, their way of whistling in the dark, even if whistling was strictly forbidden. The creaking of the weary timbers, the gentle slap of water against the hull, now sound less like threats and more like the tired sighs of a survivor. The ocean, though still vast and powerful, seems a little less menacing in the pale sunlight. Your own journey through these peculiar beliefs is drawing to a close, leaving you with a sense of the deep, strange currents that ran beneath the surface of life in the age of sail. Now, as the image of that battered but resilient ship fades and the figures of its crew grow dim, let the gentle rocking motion translate into a soothing sense of calm. The immense, restless ocean begins to settle in your mind, its surface becoming smooth and reflective, like glass. Any anxieties or fears that surface during our tale can now recede, like the tide going out, leaving behind only peaceful stillness. Feel the weariness of those sailors translate into a comfortable heaviness in your own limbs, a welcome signal for deep rest. The sounds of the storm are long gone, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic sounds of your own choosing, perhaps the soft hum of a fan or the quiet stillness of your room. Let these sounds be a comforting presence, a gentle lullaby. The need for lucky charms and whispered incantations fades away as you are safe and secure. The only journey you need to embark on now is the one into peaceful sleep. The old ship has found its harbor for the night, and so can you. Good night.